and perform for me. Come over here and perform for me. I'm on it. Give me the. Just give me the light. I'm on it. Give me the. You know, realize I am the DJ, so me take up the mic and then say, just give me the light and pass the joe. Make you feel like you're in control. Telling me to my side, and I got to know which one is gonna catch my flow. Cause I'm in the vibes and I got my dough. Make you feel like I'm in and go. Girl, I'm looking hype and I got.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the premiere episode of Barrera's Bucket. I am Mike Barrera, your host. If you've been following me since last year, you know I'm a big college hoops fan. I know recently I've been on a Union and MLS tour with Dave Miller, and we're doing a great job covering that, but I cannot wait to get back into the fall, to get back to college hoops. I love all the sports, but the college basketball league and tournament is by far my favorite thing in the entire world. So I'm excited to start to chat with you guys. If you're looking to see what this show is going to be about, it's going to be about as many conferences as I can cover in these first 3 episodes, to just talk about the teams to look for, some betting aspects, players to look out for, that kind of thing. The transfer portal was chaotic this year. There's so many players moving across the entire landscape of college basketball, both up and down. And it's hard to keep track, honestly. It's been hard for me to keep track. As much as I've been studying week by week, it's impossible. So I wanted to have a place to talk, to lay out the transfers, lay out the key teams per conference of all 32 conferences, and see who's out there, who's changed, who's someone to keep an eye on, who's a possible player of the year in each respective league. So it's a lot to talk about. As I mentioned, I want to cover all 32 conferences. I can't do it all in one episode, so I'm going to space it out 3 episodes, 11, 11, and then 10. I believe the math would be for that one. So today we're going to talk about the upper alphabetical side of the conferences. So the Big 10, the Big 12, Conference USA, and one in particular we're going to talk about is the Horizon League. And I'm going to bring on Adam Mack, one of the writers from AATSports network, to come talk with us. He's an alumni from Cleveland State, so I want to get his thoughts and some inside scoop on the Horizon League as well as his team. But overall, I hope you guys enjoy the show. And without further ado, let's get right into it. I'm going to bring Adam Mack onto the show right now. Give me bring him in there.
What's up, Mike?
What's going on? I cannot wait to start the show. How you been, man?
Dude, I'm good. Anytime I get to talk about college basketball and specifically Cleveland State, man, it is a great day.
Oh, man. So it's funny because, if you go to the average college basketball fan, aside from someone who goes to Temple or Nova in this area, they're all like, I'm a Duke fan. I'm a UNC fan. I grew up as a UNC fan, so I'm one of those people guilty of that. Not very often do you get to meet a Cleveland State or a small mid-major school fan of as yourself. So I was really excited last year when you guys went to the tournament, and I'm really excited that you were able to come to the show to talk about the Horizon League and the Vikings as well. So I'm just going to get right into it. Last year, Cleveland State, they make the NCAA tournament. What was your overall feeling and vibe after last season's success? I guess you could call it success.
Yeah. Well, part of me was kind of bitter. It was bittersweet. One, because when I was at Cleveland State, they never won more than 9 games. Never won more than 9 games. They had my freshman and sophomore year. They had a coach that was, waiting to get the boot. He was just 70 years old, waiting to retire. They go for a terrible coach and hire Dennis Felton. And I'm like, great, this team's a joke. We're a pathetic program. We should be a Division III school. So it was crazy to finally actually see them playing on ESPN and seeing the success the program can actually have, and seeing them go places. It's good for the school. It's good for the city. LeBron's not in Cleveland anymore, so Cleveland State needs to be the best basketball team in Northeast Ohio.
I mean, you guys did great. You had a 19-7 record overall. You were 16-4 in conference, so you were absolutely one of the top elite teams in that conference. And one of the cool things about the mid-major programs like Horizon or Colonial or any other smaller conference is that you typically play your conference tournaments earlier than the ACC or the bigger conference schools. So a lot of fans were watching your the conference tournament for the Horizon, because it was pretty wild. There was a couple overtime games, there was some chaotic endings throughout that tournament, but you guys managed to pull out on top. And if I
Barely. We had a
barely,
triple overtime game in the quarterfinals against Purdue Fort Wayne. I think that's I remember just watching the game and just we get through the first overtime. We're gonna lose in second overtime because we look terrible, and then just we had such a great season. Like, no way we're gonna lose in a triple overtime game to end the season. That would be such a fitting thing. But fortunately, we were on the winning side of that game.
well, you mentioned recently how you guys have not been the best school in that conference, but you've brought on Dennis Gates, who's now entering his third season. His first year wasn't great, but last year he comes out and he has a just absolutely sensational season. I was able to watch an interview with him just this past week, and he really sounds convincing as a coach. What are your thoughts on Dennis Gates, and what can you tell people who don't know anything about him?
Yeah, I remember it was the summer of 2019. I just left Cleveland State, and our athletic director made the announcement that Dennis Felton, the coach before, and his whole staff had been fired. 2 weeks later, they announced Dennis Gates, and it was a name that I immediately recognized. He was on Leonard Hamilton's staff for a decent amount of time. So he had the opportunity to coach, and kind of learn under like a true legend in the game right now, Leonard
Oh yeah.
Hamilton.
Hmm.
Someone that has really been able to produce a lot of great talent, both coaching and player-wise. So you knew he was coming from the right system. This was a great hire since he was a very up-and-coming coach. The coach before was trying to rebuild his career. It didn't work out. This is a coach that is on his way. And just his philosophy of how he's building the team. He wasn't going after those 4-star recruits right away. He wasn't going right to the ESPN top 100. He was going for those junior college kids. He
Yeah.
was going for those transfer portal kids. And that's what his mentality was. Focus on those kids because there's some really good talent out there. And you look at
Oh,
our
ton.
big three that we have,
Hmm.
Al Eichenberger, Torrey Patton, and Trey Gomillion, all either came from the transfer portal or junior college.
Yep.
So the way he grew this team and built this team is and remember, his first year, the expectations were they were going to go dead last in the conference, not win a game, completely new team. And I remember in an interview with him, he goes, you had a lot more success. 11 wins isn't great, but for your first year, brand new roster, brand new coaching staff, they voted based on what they had coming back. They didn't know what they had coming back. So obviously they're going to be voted dead last in the conference.
Right.
But to pull out 11 wins, it's impressive. And then you come out year two and you go on an absolute tear. We started the Horizon League play 9-0.
That's unbelievable.
First time
Yeah.
in program history. Most college teams can't do that. That's talking about the Dukes, the Villanovas. Gonzaga, if they were in an actual conference, wouldn't be able to do that.
Hey, WCC is better this year. Okay, don't talk too down
They'll
on that conference.
they'll still find a way to walk through it. I'm guaranteed. But go 9-0 in the conference. We dropped a couple games here and there, but he truly turned the whole program and the culture around.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends who were managers of the team who worked under all three head coaches, and they all said it's a different feel. It's like a different environment. He makes you feel like family. Even I don't remember forgetting the kid off the top of my head, but he was a manager on the team. He asked to walk on, and Dennis, he was good enough to walk on. And Dennis Gates said, "You could have said, here's your jersey." He made him earn it.
Yeah.
You need to get at least a 4.0, or I think it was like a 3.5 GPA, and then I'll give you the jersey. He ends up getting it, and then during the NCAA tournament, he's at there scoring points. So he's changed the environment around. Unfortunately, I give it another year, maybe two, and he'll be off to a bigger program. But he's changed Cleveland State basketball, for at least for now. Like, Dennis Felton pushed his program back 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis Gates turned the program around in less than a year.
Yeah, you see so many small conferences or teams in smaller conferences, even bigger conferences, really, who they hit the bottom of that basement in the conference and they just can't climb out of it. You see it sometimes with let's say East Carolina in the AAC, or you can look at Georgia Tech. They've kind of had their ups and downs in the ACC. There's some teams that just struggle to get past that second or third tier
Yep.
of a conference. So it's amazing how fast he could turn this around. One of the things you mentioned was the JUCO transfers and bringing people in that aren't just these big recruits. One of them that I saw in the interview with Dennis Gates the other day was Marambo. He was, according to Gates, was one of the best bigs in the JUCO, landscape. So that's kind of goes to credit to what you just said, how he's bringing in talent from all stretches of basketball, but he's also bringing a couple solid transfers as well. One of them being Florida State's Jack. He's bringing him in. So
Hmm.
from your perspective, how do you think this team that he's assembled can compete to last year? Because he still has his three big players coming in: Patton, Eichelberger, I think Bowden's the other one. How do you think they square up this year?
They are, I think, if not the oldest, I think they're one of the oldest teams in college basketball this
They
year.
are.
And they're bringing the top 5 leading scorers back, which is huge for the team.
Yep.
You know, on top of that, they're bringing Trey Gomillion back, reigning Horizon League Defensive Player of the Year. Al Eichenberg kind of struggled a little bit, but he was recovering from an injury. They kind of rushed him back a little bit. He's gonna have a full year to kind of get into that big man role. And then obviously Torrey Patton's back. He exercised that extra year of eligibility, and he was again probably should have been Horizon League Player of the Year last year. He's not going to get it this year because of who we'll get to a little bit later. But the core of this team is still there.
Yeah.
And I think the big thing is also the culture is still there. Now, if this was the same roster, but Dennis Gates ended up taking another job, we wouldn't be this conversation would be different.
Right.
The culture of that team is still there, and that's what I think is going to help drive this program to make maybe another run at the Horizon League in an NCAA tournament this year.
Well, go ahead. Finish your thought.
He's getting and then you also bring in the 2 transfers from Pacific and Florida State. Our biggest issue last year was 3-point shooting. We could not shoot on the perimeter. We added 3-point shot to our list now. So our one area struggled, we improved. So can this team get a lot better? I hope so. That would be nice.
Yeah, 19-7 it's a tall bar to set. So now you have to try to beat that. But the transfer portal, as I mentioned in my intro to the show, is chaotic this year. Everyone is getting transfers, aside from maybe UConn and I think Xavier were two of the few schools that really didn't get anybody. Maybe a couple of others that I'm thinking of. But one of the things that you mentioned was the age of this team. Whenever you watch a college basketball team succeed, oftentimes they're led by seniors or juniors who've had the lumps and bumps of just maturing and becoming adults. How important do you think that is, the age, or did you see anything last year with the maturity of this team that you think should carry them to the next level of maybe winning a game in the tournament this year?
Absolutely. I think I'll focus on the first part when we said having no veterans and having seniors on the team. You look the big talk of college basketball every year is like the freshman sensations.
Yep.
There has never been a team with multiple freshman sensations besides the 2015 Duke team that has truly won the national championship.
Yeah.
Look at the last. Let's go through both Villanova teams led by seniors, UNC led by seniors, Baylor led by seniors.
Yep.
The Duke team with Zion and R.J. Barrett and Cam Reddish didn't make it to the Final Four. This is supposed to be the greatest college basketball team ever. So you need seniors and veterans to make any run. Doesn't matter if you're a mid-major program or you're Duke University. You need veterans. And if you don't have veterans, you're not gonna truly succeed to the expectations you want. And look at the Cleveland State team. They all know what they need to do.
Yeah.
They know what it takes to get to where they did last year. And that loss of getting blown out to Houston is still fresh in their mind. So it should only push them to get better and want to get better, especially for a lot of them. They're done playing basketball after this. Yeah, they might go play overseas, but they're not going to the NBA. They're not going to play basketball for more than 3 years. This is their last time to truly play basketball, in America, probably for most of them.
Yeah.
Take advantage of go all out.
No, it's so true. I can't even think of an NBA player who's been from Cleveland State. And
Norris Cole.
Oh, there you go. You got one on my list. I'll try to remember for next time. But you're right. There's so many good players in mid-major programs who just can never make it to the NBA or even overseas for that matter. They just don't have the publicity, the television on them. It's just not. It's on. Just the market is too small to get that, and that obviously goes back to money as well for the size of the conferences. But Dennis Gates being a coach that might move on to the next level, maybe
Might. He will be.
he will. That's true. Eventually he's going to get the call if he hasn't gotten a call already. To go to the next level, and hopefully that brings attention to Cleveland State,
Mhm.
because even once Dennis Gates leaves, the ideal dream of any mid-major program is to get into the spotlight, get some recognition, and to continuously be a relevant team every single year, even if you're from the Horizon or from the SWAC. If
Mhm.
you're a well-known team, then that will always kind of bring you the better prospects, and you'll always be, at a higher level. But one way to get exposure is through the non-conference schedule. You might do great against the conference schedule, but the non-con is really where you get the chance to make the tournament as an at-large bid. And the Horizon is not a league that's typically going to get an at-large bid, but if you sweep your non-con or you do well in your non-con, there's always a chance. This year's schedule is pretty tough.
Yeah,
I went,
that's an understatement.
I was like, well, maybe they'll do well in the non-con. You
No.
got a tall order here. So you have BYU, you have Ohio, one of the better teams in the MAC. You got OK State, who's probably going to be middle tier, Big 12 team. You have Duke. You're going to have Coach K on your schedule on his farewell tour.
More specifically, I saw a little stat. It is the final non-conference game for Duke
Oh,
and Coach K. So it's
so,
like, okay, like I guess it's not the last game at Cameron Indoor for him, but there's still a
yeah.
little bit of this is the last non-conference game for Coach K. So it's like, all right, great, we have that on top of it.
So what's the spread going to be like on that game? It's going to be like a
We
minus
might
25.
again. I love Cleveland State, but we might lose by 30.
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised if that happened, unfortunately. And then one
No,
of the last final games you have the non-con, it's Kent State, which is another MAC team that's pretty competitive. Looking at those, was it 1, 2, 3, 5 teams I just listed? What do you think the record is? How do you think they're going to do? Do you think there's a matchup in there that you like based off this roster that you have here?
hear me
There you
now.
go, Adam. I can hear you
Uh,
now.
um, like I say, Duke's gonna be a loss. You're not
Yeah.
gonna go to Cameron Indoor as complete like as Cleveland State and go in and beat them, especially with the team we have. We're still not the greatest team, but we're good for Horizon League.
Yeah.
OK State's probably gonna be a loss just because it's a Big 12 program. The one game I really am looking forward to is the BYU game. BYU is always a very good mid-major program, especially this
Yep.
year. They're one of those teams that's positive for an at-large bid. That's gonna be a very good game for us. I think it's a game that if we can, we can take down BYU. It's a good game to put on our resume. Like, yeah, we might not win the Horizon League, but it's like we still had some big wins. So that's a good game. I think OU, Kent State are gonna be some good games. Like for a mid-major program, we have a good non-conference schedule. It's very
Oh,
balanced,
yeah.
very solid. If we can go out of this with some pretty good wins, it just boosts our confidence going into conference play, but also helps our case once it gets time for the tournament to
Mhm.
either give us a higher seed or if we don't win the conference, give us an at-large bid.
Yeah, and so you saw it last year with Belmont. Belmont was absolutely spectacular in the Ohio Valley Conference. They ended up losing to Morehead State in the final. They don't make the tournament, and I was one of the people said, "Why is Belmont not an at-large to at least be in the final
Right.
four to the first four, whatever, to get in there?" And it's unfortunate, but it comes down to non-con. If your non-con isn't competitive enough, or if you're not doing well enough, it doesn't matter if you sweep the conference. People are gonna like, well, you won in the Southland, so who cares really? At the end of the day. Um, I would say you're going to be. I just looked at the schedule now. You're going to BYU, which is a very tough place to play.
Yeah.
But if you can keep that game close, people are going to start talking about Cleveland State more, which is just a huge deal as well. And even if you don't make the NCAA tournament, you still want your team to make the NIT, which I know is not as prestigious as the NCAA tournament, but if you want more exposure, you have to make these tournaments, whether it be the NIT or the NCAA tournament, on a yearly basis, or at least be in the bubble conversation on a yearly basis, because that's the only way you're going to grow. I'd say Ohio, you might be able to do well on. I know they lost Preston; they still have a very good roster, but I think Ohio, you're playing them at your stadium, which I know is an in-state battle, so I guess it's not really an away game for them, but it's still, I think, a doable matchup for you guys at home. From a gambling perspective, last year you guys were 65% against the spread, so you guys kept games close, whether you were favorite or underdog. You were always keeping it close to the spread. But I would say, let me add one question I have for you with Cleveland State before we kind of touch on the other teams in the horizon. What would you say is a successful season for you? And what would you say is a failure of a season for you? Both spectrums there.
I think, success, obviously, if we win the tournament, the Horizon tournament, obviously, I think that right there is a huge success. I think that's obviously the expectations right now.
Yeah.
I think failure. I think my expectations going into the year, though, is kind of like I expect us to be the top tier Horizon League team. If we're not a top tier team, I think that would be considered a failure. I'm not one of those people that's championship or bust, because we have a new team in the Horizon League that is very much capable of knocking us off. So I think if we don't make it to the championship game, in my opinion, I'm going to probably call it a failure, just because there's two teams for me that are top of the Horizon League, and there's just a giant gap in between. So,
well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that for me has to be the expectation, and if we get there, I think that's kind of a good scenario for us.
Yeah, and this year the target's on your back for sure. So
Yeah.
even on the bottom dwellers of the league, you're going to get the best possible performance from every single team. So you hope that you don't have a bad loss on your conference schedule, which is always the hope for any team that wants to contend and make it to the top of the table. But two of the teams that you've mentioned, or that you've kind of alluded to rather, is Wright State and Milwaukee. So Wright State is one of those teams in the Horizon who consistently gets recognition from across the nation. They're usually towards the top of the table, and they had a solid year last year. What are your thoughts on Wright State? Are they being overlooked? Are they being underlooked? How would you rate them this year?
I think for Cleveland, or not Cleveland, Wright State, is they're like every conference. There's always that team that always is like consistently at the top, and that's Wright State. They're always at the top. Them and Northern Kentucky are usually the two teams that are up the top. Northern Kentucky's taken a big dive in the last season or two, but Wright State's one of those teams that always is consistently at the top. And I think, just for me, is I think this year, I think again they're going to still be at the top, but I don't think they are contenders this year.
Any particular reason why you say that?
Because of who's ahead of them. It's not that I think Wright State is a bad team. I think again they're going to cause some headaches to Cleveland State and Milwaukee, the other team who I think is the top of the Horizon League this year. They're going to cause some issues. Teams like Oakland will cause some issues, but I think just Wright State, they don't have the pieces in place. They've lost a little bit, decent amount from last year.
Yeah.
But I think again Wright State's always that team that's always been at the top. So everyone's initial gut instinct is to go to Wright State. You look at ESPN's bracketology, Wright State is there. Every year, guaranteed Wright State is there.
Yep.
Give it 4 weeks in the season, Wright State won't be there. Going into the season, you look at these small conferences, you have no idea who's going to be there. It's like, okay, who usually is at the top? Wright State, bing. So I think that's my kind of two cents on them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I feel like that's one reason why I want to do the show, because I want people to kind of go into the season and be like, okay, this conference I don't watch a lot. I'm just going to pick this team because they won the conference last year. It's like, hold on, let's kind of evaluate some of these top tier teams and see really who's actually going to be a true contender in the conference. You mentioned they lost a couple pieces. They lost Love, who was a 16.6 point per game kind of guy. And when you lose your highest scoring player, it's always going to be hard to come back and compete again at the same level. And you see that from the highest majors to lowest majors. Replacing a true scorer is very difficult in any league. So that's going to be a tall task for them. And then another team that we have to talk about because they have a huge player coming in is Milwaukee. So Coach Baldwin brings his son in, Pat Baldwin Jr., who's a 5-star recruit. This isn't just some regular recruit coming in. He's a top-notch recruit coming to Milwaukee to play. Now, one player doesn't make a massive difference for a team, but it does make a pretty significant or noticeable difference. How would you say Milwaukee will be? Or do you have any thoughts on Baldwin? Have you watched any clips from him or anything? What's your thoughts on Milwaukee?
I think, if Baldwin was a guard,
Mm-hmm.
or true point guard, shooting guard, I think the conversation would be a little bit different. When you kind of said that one player is not going to make a true difference. If it was a guard in the Horizon League, because the Horizon League has always, historically in the last few years, had been super good at the guard position, I would be like, he would find a way to be at least slowed down.
Mm-hmm.
The Horizon League's never been strong with the big men. Even Cleveland State, they don't have great big men. Al Eichenberg, he can put up good numbers, but he's also a pillow. He gets hit and he backs away, so he's not going to be tested as much as he would since he's a power forward.
Yeah.
And he can bully his way. You look at a couple years ago, John Morant and Weber State.
Murray State, yeah.
Murray State,
Yeah.
He took the program single-handedly to the tournament, upset Marquette. Baldwin is very capable of doing that. Again, there's a big gap in the Horizon League this year. Cleveland State's biggest thing that's going to help them against Milwaukee is they're so balanced and spread out. Milwaukee's is going to be a very good big man team. Baldwin's going to be able to turn that the big, get a lot of rebounds, a lot of putbacks, control the paint. But CSU's ability to perimeter shooting, their defense is going to help. Baldwin's is going to make it a lot more challenging for Cleveland State because again, we don't have that big man to truly match up well with him. I don't think Eichenberg is that player that's going to be able to do it. So that right there, he's going to be just a big pain in the ass. You're not going to be able to control him. So that right there is going to help the program tremendously.
That's a great point. It does base off position, and fortunately for Milwaukee, they do bring back Golson, who, from looking at his stats, he had 16.8 points per game. So you have a good scoring guard. I believe Thomas, the other guard that has, is pretty competent. So if they have good guard play, which we see across college basketball all the time, good guard play leads to usually a successful team.
Mm-hmm.
If you have good guard play and they can feed Baldwin as much as they possibly can down there, then you have a legitimate chance of making a run to the top 2-3 seeds in the conference. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch and see how, a coach like Dennis Gates plans around him and say, hey, we've never seen someone of this caliber in this conference.
Right.
How the hell do we stop him? And it's so bizarre to see someone choose the Horizon. Obviously, he's with his dad, so I get why he chose Milwaukee. But in terms of the, star attraction or the recognition, how important is it for Baldwin to be in this conference for this season?
It's tremendous. It really it's going to bring attention to the Horizon League. A lot of Milwaukee, especially for Milwaukee, a lot of their games are gonna, have a lot of attention around him because it's all season's gonna be the focus. All Baldwin to the draft. What's the stock? And scouts are gonna be at the games, and fans are gonna be watching the games of teams that are looking for top 5 picks. So it's gonna bring a lot of attention to Milwaukee. But then you got to realize Milwaukee has to play somebody. There's going to be a team at the end of the court. So you're going to get some recognition from these other players. I'm always a big advocate. I was talking to trying to think. Oh, it was Colin Gillespie. When he was being recruited out of high school, Jay Wright found him because he was trying to recruit another player.
Mm-hmm.
And he showed up, saw Gillespie, and goes, whoa, this is a really good player.
Yeah.
I could recruit him. At that point, Gillespie didn't have a Division I offer.
Turned out pretty good for both of them.
Because Jay Wright was there watching somebody else. He noticed Gillespie.
Yeah.
And then, I think that's something you're going to start seeing with scouts this year. It's like, oh, there's this player from Oakland or Northern Kentucky that I didn't have on my draft sheet. Maybe this is a late sleeper in the late first round, early second round kind of deal. So it's going to bring attention to the other teams. Scouts are going to be there watching. Fans are going to be there watching. And if Milwaukee gets a loss, like Cleveland State knocks them off, who's the team that beat Patrick Baldwin?
There you go.
And even if Cleveland State goes out and loses, okay, who do we lose to? Baldwin is a top player in the country this year, so
right.
it can't hurt to bring a player like this into the conference. It also brings attention to some recruits. It's like, oh, I will come off the bench at Duke, but I'll start at this school and get a pretty decent amount of attention. So I think it's going to help build the conference. You'll start seeing maybe some more recruits go there, but like this can only help the players also maybe get recognized a little bit.
No, I completely agree with you. And the recognition from other players is so important when you have a league that's as big as the NCAA. Like I mentioned at the start of my show, there's 32 conferences. There's no way these scouts watch every single team, every single player. It's not physically possible. There's no way I'm going to do it or anybody else. Unless you work 24 hours a day, can you watch all this basketball? So you never know who you're going to find, whether it be the NBA, the G League, an international league, etc. But looking at Milwaukee's non-con schedule, since you brought it up, they're playing North Dakota, which is one of the elite teams in the Summit every year, competitive. They play Florida, and they play Bowling Green. So Florida alone, you're playing an SEC team. You're actually playing Colorado, which is one of my favorite teams last year, was in the Pac-12. So you have teams from other conferences now watching Milwaukee, a Horizon team. They'll say, you know what? I'm going to watch Horizon more often because I watched him play Colorado. This kid, Baldwin, was awesome. I'm going to watch his next game. Oh, wait, he's playing Cleveland State. He's playing Wright State, whatever it might be. So one player can make a difference
Mhm.
in a lot of different ways. So that's one of the most exciting things for me as a whole. But now, realistically speaking, if you could rate these three teams without being biased, because you're from
Yeah.
Cleveland State, how would you rank these three teams?
Well, Wright State's easily number 3. That's
Okay.
that's not even a question.
Okay.
But truthfully, again, I think Milwaukee's the top team. I think they're the team to beat. You know, like you kind of said earlier, Cleveland State has the target on their back because defending conference champions, they're returning everybody. Dennis Gates still there, but in the end, you got to go on the overall talent of the roster. And even though Cleveland State is the most balanced roster, Milwaukee has the best roster. So I think you have to go with Milwaukee. I think Baldwin, he's that difference maker and game changer for them.
Yeah.
So I got to go Milwaukee. Again, I hope I'm wrong. I hope Cleveland State comes out and smokes them. But I'm going to go. I had to say Milwaukee.
Yeah, and they even bring some transfers from credible schools. You have a transfer from UCF, you have a transfer from South Florida, so you have down transfers come into play in a league where they should do better in. You see it all the time across the basketball landscape. Players may not be getting minutes at Kentucky or West Virginia, so they go to a small school, and next thing you know, they're playing great because they have the opportunity and the skill set to perform at that level. Not to mention, as much as one player necessarily can't completely change a team's future, we see it all the time in basketball. One player can change a game at any moment. If he's the best player on the court every single time, then they always have a chance to beat you because you never know when he's just going to go off and do whatever he needs to do to win. So I think I agree with you from the star standpoint. I do love though the experience that Cleveland State has. And for me, I always lean to experience. So I think I'm going to go with you with your team, Cleveland State, to win it. I hope I'm right because I want you to be
Roll
rooting for
Bucks,
them.
man.
Yeah. Well, and actually, before I forget, let me ask you: how do you think they did against Houston in the NCAA tournament? I know they lost, but
Yeah,
what was
again,
your overall vibe?
I knew we were going to lose. Like, that wasn't a question.
Yeah.
Houston should have been a 1 seed. Like, that's like, as soon as I saw that match, like, I knew kind of where Cleveland State was going to end up. I knew it would be a 15 seed. I'm like, Houston, I'm like, yep, it's going to be us. Yep, there's Cleveland State. I knew we were going to lose. Again, I think it's just the overall experience of we got to the tournament. We weren't supposed to be there. It was Dennis Gates turning the program around. I think in that sense was a victory. I think the season as a whole, we won. So, yeah, we lost. We got blown out by Houston. That sucked. But we made the tournament. We weren't meant to be there. The culture of this program is better than it's ever been before. We could have lost by 100. I'd still feel the same way. No, I think we still lost by 30, 40, whatever it may be. But I would have loved it to be closer. I would have loved to pull off the upset. I would have. I wish we had Oral Roberts spot. We could play Ohio State and knock them off. But fortunately, we got the team that should have been a number 1 seed, lost in the Final Four. But overall, it was a victory for the season, but just not a victory for that game.
And imagine if you had won that game. So if you had won that game, you would have played Rutgers, I think it was who won the next round between Clemson and Rutgers. And then you would have been playing Syracuse. So you would have had a couple double-digit seeded teams
Yeah.
up ahead of you. So once you do that, it's like Oral Roberts. You never know who you're just going to
Yeah.
run through. So, but again, I think you nailed it perfectly. When you are a smaller school from a smaller conference, you have to take the small victories and see the big picture. And if in your second year with a new coach, well, everybody bought in and was able to push for that giant run to the tournament, I think you absolutely have to say A+ effort. Now let's build. If you go regress, then it's all for nothing. You have to continuously build and build.
Mhm.
But I mean, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today. I have so many conferences to talk about, but I was so excited to talk about Horizon and Cleveland State. Like I mentioned before in the studio, I could be talking about Duke right now or Florida State. I want to talk about some mid-major teams. So this is really exciting. Any final thoughts on whether on this team or anything about what you're doing right now and places people can find you at?
Yeah, obviously, I think one last final comment I'm gonna make.
Yeah.
This is gonna be Dennis Gates' last year at Cleveland State. If your team is lucky enough to get him as a head coach, you are in great hands. So, but
Definitely.
you obviously can check me. I always right here for All About the Birds all the time. I'm big into
Mhm.
the NFL and college football. You can find me at once we get into the draft. Johnny and I will be doing our draft show.
You guys did great with that last year too.
All draft show, and then I got my college football show over on the Cut podcast network every Thursday night. So I like to bounce around and just get my voice heard because
Yeah,
I love hearing
absolutely.
my own voice sometimes.
Well, listen, if Cleveland State goes on a run, I promise you'll have you on at towards the end of the season and talk maybe like some pre NCAA March Madness Cleveland State
I'm good
vibes.
for it.
All
I'm
right,
excited.
all right, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Have
Thanks
a
for
good
having me
one.
on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Man. Have a good one. All right, so now you're stuck with me for the rest of the show. Like I mentioned, I wanted to talk about 10 more conferences today, Horizon being the first one. We have a lot to talk about. First and foremost, I'm going to go right to one of the most elite conferences in the nation. They were a bit last year, didn't perform that well in the tournament itself, but the Big Ten is something that we have to talk about in terms of great teams top to bottom. And when you want to talk about the Big Ten, the bigs in the Big Ten are really, really fun this year. So you got Kofi Coburn from Illinois, you got Hunter Dickinson from Michigan, Liddell from OSU, Jackson Davis, Indiana. You got two guys from Purdue. You have Edie and you have Travion Williams, and you have one of the newest members to the Big Ten, Ketis Wahab in Maryland. He was at Georgetown, if you guys remember from their great run to the conference tournament. He's joined Maryland, Fats Russell in Maryland, to see if they can be a top 25 team this year. So it's pretty exciting for the Big Ten in terms of the big men to watch out for. Now, when you look at the teams that I think are going to be the best teams in this conference, and I think many people agree, Purdue and Michigan are top of that list. Now, I said it earlier with Adam, I believe in seniority and veteran leaders to be a difference maker when it comes to a tournament or a national title contending team. Purdue brings back everybody, and they're led by Travion Williams, most likely an All-American this year, who's just an incredible player. And then you have another big guy to talk about, Zach Edey, who's just another large presence who will do great things for Purdue. I know last season wasn't exactly the best turnout for them. They ended up losing to North Texas, I believe, in the first round, which is a hard thing to swallow considering how solid they were. They weren't great, but they were pretty solid. Stefanovic was another great role player. He's back this year, so I think the collective veteran leadership, they've went through their lumps last season. I do think Purdue will be to the top of the league this year. But you can't rule out Michigan. We saw how good they were last year. They were one of the best teams in the league last year. Uh, Howard has done a great job recruiting, and arguably this year he's the best recruiting class across the board. So you know that if his players leave, he's going to get refueled with some new young talent. But all eyes are on Dickinson this year. Can he take his game to the next level? Can he perform and make up for the loss of Wagner and Livers? And how can they continue to dominate the Big Ten and other teams in general across the entire basketball landscape? One way they can do it is through transfers. They brought in Devontae Jones, who was a Sun Belt Player of the Year for Coastal Carolina. That's again the recruiting, not just high school kids, but across the nation bringing transfers in. So Michigan will do well. Against the spread last year, they were 19-9. So if you're looking from the gambling standpoint, how does their losses affect the betting side of things moving forward? I think they won't have too much of a dip, but 19-9 is a pretty hard number to get back to. Regardless, I think we should keep an eye on them. moving forward. Now, one team that people are ruling out too early is Illinois. I know Ayo DeSumo got drafted. Obviously, he was an NBA talent. It's hard to replace NBA talent, but you still have Kofi Coburn. And if you watched him at all, you saw how dominant he was in the paint. And you think, okay, well, he can't do it by himself. You're absolutely right, he can't. But he still has Curbelo, who will be the next player to watch for in Illinois. Now, I'm not saying Illinois is going to be a top 2 team. I don't believe that's the case. Maybe they can with Kofi being a year older. But don't rule Illinois out. I think they're a top 4 or 5 team in this conference. I think most people would agree with that as well. The next one that people may overlook now is Indiana. Last year, they were a feisty team. They had a couple wins, couple losses here that were close and hard fought. But they have a new coach this year with Mike Woodson. He brings some NBA experience to Indiana. And he has a great player in Trace Jackson Davis, who is similar to Kofi Coburn or Dickinson, another big man who can make a massive difference in this league. So look for him to have a revamped offense, a deeper squad. My cat's knocking stuff over in the background. I apologize. And and Indiana, I think, could be a sleeper team. Well, maybe not a sleeper if you follow college basketball, but if you're strictly looking at last season, Indiana's a team that you want to keep an eye on. Same with Ohio State. Yes, you lose Dwayne Johnson. I'm sorry, Dwayne Johnson. Oh my gosh, Dwayne Washington. Uh, but you still have EJ Liddell. He's another big player to watch. The offense is still going to be pretty good. Kyle Young, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, was out for the Oral Roberts game last year when Oral Roberts upset Ohio State. If he's healthy, you have EJ Liddell. Ohio State should again be a lower high tier in this conference. You never know what could happen. And finally, one of the last top teams I want to talk about that I think a lot of people got hyped on was Maryland. Now, Maryland had Wiggins last year and Morcell. Morcell was the Defensive Player of the Year in the Big Ten last season. And oddly enough, he leaves a top 25 team to go to Marquette to play with Shaka Smart. I get it defensively. Go to Marquette, play with Shaka to be in that system, but I don't understand it personally. Regardless, you bring in Fats Russell from Rhode Island. Some people are not big on Fats Russell. I understand why. His numbers weren't exactly amazing across the board, but you have to think he's on Rhode Island with Rhode Island talent. How much is he just trying to push the envelope too much? Is he trying to do too much? We saw this with Marcus Carr in Minnesota, another team that I'm just going to briefly mention here. How is he going to perform now with more talent around him? Can he take it to the next level? And Wahab from Georgetown, which was a tough loss for Patrick Ewing's team. Losing a big man like that is a hard blow for a team who was maybe starting to get some momentum entering the following season. So I wouldn't say Maryland is an elite team with what they lost, but I can see them maybe being the 4th seed if Fats can really take it to the next level. So we'll see. Their coach hasn't always had the best luck. And I'm sorry, his name is escaping right now, but we'll see what happens. And in terms of the bottom tiers of the Big Ten, Michigan State, they brought in Walker from Northeastern. How is he going to compete on a higher level? You have Rutgers with Ron Harper Jr. I can't forget to mention him. He's a solid player, but the Rutgers, they were really great last season, and then they kind of collapsed, and then they made the tournament. So it's one of those teams you're not really sure what they're going to get. They lose a couple pieces as well, so they have to be their eye has to be on them. My power's going out now. The cat's making noise. Power's going out. It's a great first episode, but in Iowa, they lose Garza. They lose a couple big key pieces there. Is it going to be good enough to compete again? I don't think so. Penn State, Northwestern, Nebraska, Minnesota, they're on the bottom of that table. Don't expect much from them. Competitive, sure. Keep games close, sure. They're not going to be top 5, top 6 teams in the conference. That's just not doable. But conclusion, I'm going with Purdue. I'm going with what they have there, and I love them. The next conference for me was the Big Ten. The Big Ten for me, the Big 12. The Big 12 for me was better than the Big Ten, in my opinion, last season. People would disagree. Regular season, they thought the Big Ten was the team to beat or the conference to beat. I disagree in part. I think that the Big 12 was better, and as you saw, Baylor ends up getting the national championship, and I believe that the conference they played in helped prepare them for that. So the team that not just me, I think everybody's looking to watch is Texas. Chris Beard comes in from Texas Tech and just brings in some great talent. He has Marcus Carr. He has Trey Mitchell from UMass. He brings in Disu from Vandy. But Marcus Carr, was an absolute stud last year. Yes, he played in Minnesota, who was awesome at home, terrible on the road. And you think, well, he couldn't carry that team to the next level, but who was playing well in Minnesota besides Marcus Carr long term? I think Robbins was one player, if I remember correctly, on that squad that was a solid piece. But you put Marcus Carr in a Chris Beard team, and things can change. You saw what Matt McClung could do last year with Texas Tech. I think Chris Beard has a lot of work on his hand. He's got a lot of mouths to feed on this team. Yes, his defense is probably going to be pretty good. No one's going to argue that. But how can you feed all of these players the ball offensively? How can he make it mesh? Regardless, I think on paper Texas is the best team. I have future picks on them as already, so I want to see them win the Big 12. I'm going to conclude my Big 12 prediction now by saying I think Texas is going to win the conference. But there's so many great teams here to look for. One in particular is Kansas. The Blue Bloods hit a hard wall last year. We saw that with Duke. We saw that with UNC, Kentucky. Kansas made the tournament, but they weren't the same kind of Kansas feel to it. This year they're different. They bring in Remy Martin from Arizona State. They bring in Yusefu from Drake. Drake, I'll get to another episode, was an awesome team to watch, and Yusefu was a big part of that. So Bill Self brings in the talent to compete again. He has McCormack as well, who's a good interior passer, someone to watch as well. But their team is more mature now. They have the ability to compete at the higher level. And some people are picking Kansas second, third, fourth, or fifth ranked in the country across the board, not just in the conference, across the board. So Kansas has a high expectations, as it always does every single year. So I expect them to be number 2. I could see them being number 1 because they bring in some really impressive talent. But for now, I would say 2 behind Texas for sure. And then I have to talk about Baylor because Baylor won me a lot of money last year. I had them as my future pick for the tournament. I had them winning the tournament. I had them that helped me win the pot for the All About the Birds, tournament that year. So I love Baylor. I love what they had to offer last season. But you're losing Mitchell, Butler, Teague, and Vital, 4 players who contributed to this team from top to bottom, from the beginning of the year to the end. I mean, Vital alone, the 4th best player on that list I just named, was huge in the title game against Gonzaga. Oddly enough, I believe he got signed to a practice squad to play tight end. So you're losing some pretty significant pieces, but you have a lot to look forward to. You have Akinjo from Arizona, who's a big transfer. I know John Rothstein, who's a great college basketball follow, if you guys don't follow him already. He is predicting Flagler to be the Big 12 Player of the Year. So if they have a Big 12 Player of the Year, can they on their roster? If they have some good transfers coming in, they obviously have the culture there. They can compete again for the Big 12 title. I don't know if they replace the NBA talent to be the winner of the national title again, but it's definitely possible. A couple more Big 12 teams. I'm just going to run through: Texas Tech, West Virginia, OK State. 3 teams that were competitive last year. 3 teams that made the tournament. OK State loses Kay Cunningham to the draft, but you still have Likely on the staff. It's possible that they can move on without Kay Cunningham, but it's hard to replace a top level at that. Same with West Virginia. You lose Culver. You lost Oshiwe last year, Oscar Oshiwe last year already. They relied heavily on shooting. It's very hard to win when you rely strictly on shooting. You need to have some interior or 3-point, well, not 3-point, but just different ways to score just besides a post-up shot. So it's going to be interesting to see how they develop past that. I don't think West Virginia makes a big noise this year, probably middle tier. And Texas Tech, how's Texas Tech going to live without Chris Beard? I know they bring O'Banner from Oral Roberts. That's one of the big signings right there. But it's when you have a first-year coach, even if it's someone who's in the system like before, like Mark Adams, it's hard to always predict how they're going to do. So I'm going to hold on my prediction of Texas Tech. I don't see them being top 5 or 6 in this conference. Maybe or nothing higher than that, rather, but probably not much lower than that either. And one team I'm really interested to watch is Oklahoma. So you lose Lon Kruger, which is a historic coach in the NCAA. You bring in Porter Moser from Loyola Chicago. He has some interesting transfers coming in. He brings the Groves brothers from Eastern Washington, who we saw a bit last season in the March Madness. It's a team it's 2 players that are pretty intriguing, and you can think, how is he going to use Tanner Groves in particular? Is he going to use him like a Krutwig type player, that interior presence passer, Can he replicate what he had at Loyola Chicago? Right now, I'd say no. It's very hard to coach at a next level. Very hard to play at the next level when you played on a mid-major. Now, I think the Missouri Valley Conference is one of the higher mid-majors out there, but it's still going to be an adjustment for everybody to learn his defensive scheme, to learn what he wants to do. So I think they're going to be, again, like Texas Tech, West Virginia, in that middle tier moving forward. But as I mentioned before, I think Texas is the team to beat in the Big 12. KSU and TCU on the bottom tier fighting for that lower tier, in Iowa State. Let's not talk about Iowa State. They're pretty crappy. A10, though. One of my favorite teams last year was St. Bonaventure. One of my favorite teams this year is going to be St. Bonaventure. They returned 5 of their starters. One of the problems with St. Bonnie's last year was they were very reliant on their starting 5. That's a good thing in terms of you have an experienced squad that leads your team. That's great. The bad side about that is if you don't have any depth, you're going to constantly go through offensive droughts, which you see on the NBA and college level. You have to have bench depth to help your team stay in a flow throughout the entire regular season or even just any game. You have to have that depth to help you. So you hope that they can add some depth to that lineup. Lofton is one player right now that is a player to watch out there. Can he take his game to the next level? Can he improve his shooting enough to make St. Bonaventure a team that can win a game in the NCAA tournament? Not just make it, but win it. Regardless, they have an impressive team who was 70% against the spread last year. They were just great to bet on. They were great to watch. And I expect them to be a top A10 team again. But one of the teams that people are forgetting about is Richmond. Now, Richmond last season had a lot of bad luck. They had some injuries. I believe they had COVID pauses. They went through their lumps throughout the year. And they ended up finishing around the middle of the pack of the A10 in the standings. But preseason, people thought Richmond was going to be a top A10 team. They bring everybody back. They lose Francis, who was a big contributor. But for the most part, they bring everybody back. And they also have Nick Sherrod coming back. He missed the season last year with an ACL. So he's essentially not a transfer, but a new addition that you didn't have last year. So you have a team that on paper could compete for the A10 title. Again, it's going to come down to, on paper, they might do well. How will they compete against St. Bonaventure for that top spot? I believe from looking at the schedule, they're playing Drake, which is a great non-conference game for them if they can pull it off, because I think Drake is going to be the Missouri Valley Conference winner this year. So they have to put their money where their mouth is and show that they can compete in this conference. Other teams to look for: St. Louis, Davidson, VCU. Everybody always talks about these 3 teams. St. Louis, they had a tough schedule as well last year. They had an entire month canceled for COVID, but they still ended up with a decent record. They can definitely compete for that 3rd spot, maybe even 2nd if Richmond doesn't pan out the way they should. Javante Perkins being the player to watch from them. He had 17.1 points per game last season. So you have some transfers coming in. You lose, Goodwin, who's one of your better scorers, but you still have Perkins. I think they can push for 3rd and 4th seed. There's no reason why they can't. They have the talent there. Same with Davidson now moving further down the tiers of the A10 conference. You lose Grady to Kentucky. Carter Collins goes to Murray State. Bate Jones goes to Duke. So you lose 3 key pieces to different schools. I can't pronounce his first name. I'm sorry. I think it's Hyunjung Lee. A really nice sophomore season, and his numbers that I looked up are absolutely insane. He shot 44% from 3. He shot 50% from the floor and 90% from the free throw line. So you have a talented player on this team. It all comes down to the people around him. How is a squad going to help him out? The same thing can be said about Bones Highland, who left VCU last year. Now you have Jameer Watkins there as a possible breakout player, but can you surround him enough with talent? Can he lead this team like Bones Highland did? Can Davidson lead now with Lee compared to the missing all those players they lost to the transfer portal? So those 3 teams that I mentioned, probably closer to the middle section of the tier for A10, but Richmond and St. Bonaventure teams to watch absolutely moving forward. I got a couple quick hitters. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, 32 conferences. I'm not going to lie to you and say I watch every single team from every single conference. That's physically impossible because I have a life, a job, and a kid, and a family, so I can't do that. But I do want to talk about a couple teams from a couple smaller conferences that people might just be curious to hear about. One right here I'll go into is the America East Conference. Vermont with Coach John Becker is just a great coach. He is always putting Vermont towards the top of the table. UMBC loses their coach, Ryan Odom. UMBC, if that name rings a bell, was a team that upset number 1 Virginia in the tournament a couple years ago. Ryan Odom gets sent to Utah State to coach out there, which was a pretty interesting move from one coast to the other. But this is Vermont's league. If you're looking at America East, you look at Vermont, you expect them to win the conference, especially with UMBC being on a rebuild, I guess you could say. Another conference to look for that two teams in particular from this new next conference I'm looking at is the Big Sky. You have Southern Utah and Weber State at the top of this table. I know people saw Montana had some competitive games last year, but they really couldn't finish games, which makes it difficult to bet on. So if you're looking at it from a betting perspective, don't worry, I have you covered here. Weber State, they return a lot of their roster, which is great for a team who always competes for the Big Sky. They also bring in Kobe McEwen from Marquette. This team should be good. Last year, they covered against the spread at 70%. So you know they're going to keep games close. They're going to do well against the weaker opponents as well. But Southern Utah, on paper, I think is a team that I'm going to choose again this year. They return basically their everybody. They return their entire starting 5, which, as I mentioned with St. Bonaventure, is crucial. If you return your starters, if you return the core group of players, it makes a whole world of difference, especially if they're experienced. So Southern Utah, they went 20-4 last year. So you're having a team that was successful last season come back basically ready to rock and roll again. Against the spread, they were 68% against the spread. So they're going to compete again, both for your pocket as well in the tournament. I'm going to pick Southern Utah to win the Big Sky. Montana State, Montana, Weber State, I think will be second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. But yeah, definitely Southern Utah there. Going down to the Big South. Now, the Winthrop is the one who represented the Big South in the conference in the NCAA tournament last year. DJ Burns is a beast inside. I loved watching him play. But you lose Waldron, who was basically like a triple-double threat every single time he played. So that's a big loss for them. They were a good shooting team last year. They do lose a couple pieces as well, though. So Winthrop will be an interesting one. They also lose their coach. He goes to Charleston. So that's a weird transition for a coach. I mean, I thought he had a good thing going for Winthrop, but they have the pedigree. They have the culture. I don't need Campbell is one team, though, in particular that I did some research on, and I feel pretty good about them. Against the spread, they were 56% against the spread. Not great, enough to make you some money if you strictly bet them against the spread all year. But they were 17-10 last year overall, 11-6 in the conference. Not great. Again, you bring the majority of your roster back. You can see them making a push. I want to go against the grain. I feel like everybody's going to see the Big South and say, okay, Winthrop. I'm not feeling it. I'm going to go with Campbell. If I'm wrong, so be it. Keep moving along these conferences. Only a few more to go here. The Big West. So the Big West is known for UC Irvine. They're one of the better schools in that conference every single year. And I would say, kind of like Winthrop, there's going to be a team that everybody picks right off the bat. And rightfully so, they return a large portion of their roster. Con Welp is a big 15 points per game scorer, so he's going to be a leader on the thing. They're not the oldest squad, but they have the pedigree, as I said before with Winthrop. They went 18-9 last year. You should expect for them to again be a top-level Big West team. But UC Santa Barbara is a team that I'm looking for. They made the tournament last year. The Gauchos were favored in a lot of brackets to cause an upset. Most of that was from Jakar McLaughlin, who was just a walking bucket. But he's no longer on the squad. They ended up losing him and a couple starters. And you saw last year how good they were. They only lost to Creighton by 1 point. Now, Creighton wasn't the most dominant team, but still, you almost beat a Power 6 team in the conference or the NCAA tournament with your roster. So you have to feel good about your future, and you do return some experienced players as well. Most importantly, you return 5 of the top 7 scorers. So when you lose players, one of the hardest things to replicate or to, I guess, fix is the scoring aspect. Who's going to step up? Who's going to take the last second shot? Who's going to improve their game, whether it be the free throw line, cut into the basket, the post up? You have 5 of your top 7 scorers back. That's pretty impressive to bring back. So I expect UC Santa Barbara to be up there. And one of the other college basketball outlets that you can look at is the 3-man weave. I'm a massive 3-man weave fan, and they're big on UC Riverside. And if they're big on UC Riverside, that's a team that I'm going to look for. They mentioned their defense being pretty solid this year. So 3 teams right there from the Big West. You got to stay up late to watch their games, but I think I'm going to go with the Gauchos this year to go back to the NCAA tournament. Now, one conference that I'm very excited for that has 3 to 4 teams that I'm excited to watch is Conference USA. So right off the bat, you want to focus on Louisiana Tech. He's the biggest name right there is Kenneth Lofton Jr. He's on the U19 squad. He's just an unbelievable talent, just a bowling ball in the paint, who just has that perfect soft touch for that big man. And you guys all know what I'm talking about. If you watch basketball, you always know a big man has that perfect soft touch, and that's Kenny Lofton Jr. No relation to the baseball player. I already looked it up. They should be good. They have a good team ahead of them. When you have someone of that talent, I expect them to make a push for the Conference USA title, and I think most people have them, pushing for that, especially because they have most of their roster returning. But one team I think will win this conference this year is UAB. Last year, their defense was very good, and they are extremely deep this year. And they bring in transfers from USF, Ole Miss, Auburn, LSU, Southern Alabama, Tulane. I mean, they returned their top 3 scorers in Ertl, Levon, and Quan Jackson. Quan Jackson defensively had 2.1 steals per game. So you have a roster who is 9, 10, 11 players deep. And you have transfers coming down transfers from top-level Power 6 conferences. UAB is going to be a team that you will absolutely have to watch if you're a Power 6 team. If you're playing them in your non-con schedule, you cannot take them lightly. They will compete and they will play at a high level, and I think UAB will make they will win the conference, and they will also make the NCAA tournament. Really excited to watch them, and I'm actually sorry I didn't watch them more last season. Other teams to look for: Western Kentucky. They have some experience. They bring back Charles Bassey, who's 17 points per game. A handful of transfers as well. So you have a retooled roster. I know some people might be up on them, down on them. I think consensus-wise, you want to rate Western Kentucky as a 3 or 4th seed, or 3 or 4th seeded team in this conference. So expect Western Kentucky to make some noise. I was actually just talking to Adam Mack. He is also a Marshall graduate as well. I think he spent a couple years in Marshall before he went to Cleveland State. So he mentioned Marshall not being that great this year. He actually had some inside scoop for us saying that the new AD will be coming in. This is most likely D'Antoni's last season here. You bring back a lot, including Tavion Kinsey, 19 points per game, Andrew Taylor, 12 points per game, but you lose Gerard West to Louisville. You have newcomers. Can D'Antoni save his coaching career here at Marshall? I don't know. When you're playing Western Kentucky, North Texas, who went to the tournament last year, who upset Purdue last year, when you have UAB, when you have Louisiana Tech, who is arguably the best player in the conference, I don't know if Marshall can compete enough to make it to that next level. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams in Conference USA you want to keep an eye on. I cannot wait to watch UAB in particular. And then the final conference right here, one of the local teams, Drexel, you'll find yourself in the Colonial, a conference that I'm not big on, a conference that most people that I listen to are probably tuned off on because they're not big on it. But you have a couple teams to watch for. James Madison being the one in particular that most people are going to pick to win this conference. I am one of them as well. Last year, they were 70.6% against the spread. Yes, they lose Matt Lewis, their highest scorer, but they bring back a ton. And even if it's an experienced group or a youthful group, you have a good program and the resources in place to compete. Hodge and Edwards in particular are players to watch. You also bring in Phelan from Winthrop. As I mentioned earlier, they lose their shooting. James Madison picks it up. So I think you're fine. I think you have enough pieces to make up for Matt Lewis's absence. I have James Madison winning the Colonial this year. Another local tie, I guess you want to say, Speedy Claxton. People might remember him from the Sixers. He's now the coach he is the coach for Hofstra. They should be a solid team. Drexel was a tournament darling last year. They were very good against the spread, 66% against the spread. Maybe not very good, but they were solid against the spread. You bring back Winter, you bring back Butler. You have players in place who can put Drexel top 3 team in the Colonial. I don't think they make the tournament again. History tells you they're probably not going to make the tournament again for another 20 years. But as a local fan, as a Philly fan, you want to see the local teams do well. So I'm hoping Drexel makes it. I don't think they pass through James Madison. And I mentioned the three-man weave earlier. They're really big on Delaware. They have a lot of returning players. They have healthy players now. They might be a team to look out for in the Colonial. And finally, Northeastern and Charleston. As I mentioned earlier, Pat Kelsey from Winthrop left Winthrop. He's now with Charleston. I think I might have said Charlotte earlier. I apologize. Charleston. He's with Charleston now. We'll see how he does. And, it's hard to predict how a new coach will do in a new school, a new environment, new players. But he's a great coach. He has the pedigree from Winthrop to take a program and really make it a pretty significant contender every single year. So Charleston will be a team I'm looking for. And Northeastern. They lose Walker to Michigan State. I know Michigan State fans are hyped up about it because he's a good player, but I don't know how he's going to do at a Big Ten conference. You have a lot of great players in the Big Ten. But one of the questions this year for Northeastern is how can they replace Walker? Can they continue to play at a higher level in the Colonial? A lot of questions asked. Again, a conference I'm not very knowledgeable on. I'm just giving you the teams I noticed being towards the top of the table. Overall, James Madison will be the team that I'm going to pick here. But that's our 11 conferences this week's episode. I'm very thankful to have Adam Mack on the show to talk about the Horizon. I know for a fact I'll be watching Milwaukee and Cleveland State this year. Next episode, I will be talking to Johnny Uleka, who is a fellow member of AATSports. He's also a really big Villanova fan, so I know he's going to be talking about Gillespie, Jay Wright, how they're going to move on from without Robinson Earl in the lineup. So I cannot wait to talk to him next week. And then I'll also be talking about the next 11 conferences on my list, which will be the ACC, the Big East, the Patriot, the SWAC, Southern, Southland, Summit, Sun Belt, the WAC, and the WCC. So we're going to have a lot to talk about. Some of those conferences I know are not the most exciting, but I will do my best to make them as exciting as possible because I think it's all important. We should all know the top teams in each conference. With that, I'm going to wrap it up with my sponsors because we have to get paid. As always. First up is Manscaped. Manscaped is partnered with AAT Birds. Use the code AAT Birds for 20% off and free shipping at checkout. I know Chip and his wife love it. They talk about it all the time. Statement Games, statementgames.com for fun, free, new look at fantasy sports. It's a pretty cool, different way of betting, so please check that out. The link is right here below. Following that is Odds Jam. They use an arbitrage calculator to make sure you never lose a bet again. Arbitrage betting is a very complicated and difficult way to bet, in my opinion, but they make it easy. So please check it out. Sign up for oddsjams.com. One of our newest sponsors now is La Terrain Watches. The code right there, use AAT Birds for 10% off a checkout at laterrain.com. Some great looking watches right there. And then last but not least, we have the network shop, AAT Sports Network Shop. As you can see, I'm wearing Barrera's bucket shirt right now. We have Across the Pitch gear. We have Chips and Dish gear. We have Burning Bridges, one of our new NFL shows gear. So we have a lot of great stuff. T-shirts, cups, mugs, bags, sweaters, a lot to show off your AAT Sports swag. So please give it a look, contribute, and we really appreciate it. But again, I am Mike Barrera. This is part 1 of my conference previews. Part 2 will be released next week. I'll be releasing this show on Saturday. And then week 3, I'll be talking to Paul, one of our other AAT Sports writers, who will be talking about UConn. And I'll talk about the next set of conferences there. So thank you so much for joining along. I really appreciate it, and cannot wait for the college basketball season.